So for the remaining, you know, whatever, 15 minutes that we have together, we wanted to change up the format and have you, and I know Jennifer, you mentioned this, have you ask a question, right? We've asked you questions, you've seen this in advance, you've gotten a chance to prepare, but this is a learning opportunity for you. We have some special education staff on the call, we have parent advocates on the call. So ideally you use this format to learn for yourself from the community, you know, that's focused on special education. So how we're gonna do this is you can ask a question that you want answered to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. And we, you know, everybody is invited, of course, to ask a question. How we're gonna do this is we're gonna hear the questions first, because some of you may have like, yeah, that's the thing I wanna know too. This is a learning opportunity for all of us with each other. And so we're gonna hear the questions first, and then I'm gonna call on some of the special education staff and the parent advocates that are here to answer those questions for us. And so that way we can really learn from the room together. So how we'll do it so where everyone's not like, do I unmute myself or what do I do, is I'll just go by district. So if anybody in District 8 has a question that they want answered to improve outcomes for students with disabilities, we'd love to hear it.
Noelita, why don't you go first? Ladies first.
Thank you, Jared. I appreciate that. Okay, so my question is a two-parter. One, I was taking a look at the 2009 final report that AISD commissioned. It's called Review of Staffing Practices for Students with Disabilities, and there are 21 recommendations. If anybody has an update on kind of like what happened from after that report, and this is the second part of it, like what are the biggest barriers to achieving inclusive education? Yeah, I have a longer question, but I think I'll keep it to that.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else in District 8 that has a question?
I do.
Great.
So my question comes, I guess, having that experience and talking with several parents in our district is our students oftentimes, sometimes their special education needs and services are not being, I guess, met, or they're not being diagnosed as early as or as soon as they should be. What are some things, I guess, that you think that we can do to ensure that that is a reality? Because we know that if we prolong, I'm sorry, I'm answering the question that I think is the answer. Let me stop right there.
I like that.
It goes to that point where as candidates, we're expected to know a little bit of something. But anyways, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead, please.
What would you think are the best incentives to recruit and retain teachers in AISD for our special ed students and service providers? How do we do that? We keep teacher turnover, and we've got a lot of students and teachers leaving. So I'm really curious on any ideas on how we can make sure that we've got a consistent staffing for sure, especially for our special ed students.
Great, thank you. And John and Ofelia in District 2, do you have a question that you want to share?
Yes, I do. Thank you. How and why have schools been able to get away with not providing the resources to the campus, to the students, to the teachers, the special ed department, the special ed students? How is it that they were not held accountable to not doing that?
Thank you. And John, do you have a question?
How can special ed services link up effectively and ethically with translation services so that people who speak Spanish at home get the same kind of services as people who speak English at home?
Thank you.
or Vietnamese or something else, but
Sure, absolutely.
at
And-
the same time.
At the same time, okay. And Kevin, did you have a question?
Sure. So what are the best campus level indicators, quantitative, so maybe 1 to 2 to 3 quant measures, and then also from a qualitative inquiry standpoint, what is the best way to get to know whether a campus is doing well or not? So if I want to know my 14 campuses, how they're really doing, what are the best quantitative indicators and qualitative indicators?
Great, thank you. Okay, and District 5, do you have a question? Go ahead, Piper.
I love all the talk about inclusivity and building inclusive communities. I'm real curious though about the standalone programs, the life skills, the SOAR. And I'm curious whether there is a role for those standalone sort of programs, and if you all feel there is a role, how would that work? What would be the best way to make that work?
Thank you. Jennifer, go ahead.
Thanks. We know that our special education students are the often the highest priority for students who really need face-to-face instruction. What can the district do better to help teachers be able to safely provide face-to-face instruction and to accommodate the teachers that are not comfortable with face-to-face?
Thank you. And Lynn, did you have a question?
I do. My question is, what would your students want us to know? I don't think we hear student voice enough, and I would love to know what your students would tell us if they were here, whether you're a teacher or a parent.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so I want to be mindful of our time. So we have about 10 minutes, and I think I'm already committing that I think we could, if we don't get to all of these, that we can share answers to some of these. There's some really great questions, but I want to send the first question over to Heather. And I think that this is a timely topic, is around staffing. So the question around what are potentially some best incentives that we can implement right now to not just recruit teachers, but keep them?
Well, that is a great question. Thank you for that question. So, a few things. For one thing, we've been talking about this for a few years, and only this past year have we really gained traction in special education. Last year, for the first time, we got an increase in our stipend. I've been in this district since 2004, and it was $1,000 a year for case managers. And case managers are not only special education teachers, but they case manage their students and their art facilitators. So we take on 3 different roles and basically get paid $1,000 more than our general ed counterparts. Now, last year when we asked for $1,000 more, the trustees at the time didn't really get it, so they offered $500. Now, after this past year, we've lost a bunch of itinerant staff and teachers, and so this past year, they went ahead and upped that even more, did give us the $2,000 and increased the stipend for special programs. It shouldn't have to get to a desperate situation before districts decide to value us, I think, as special educators. And so I think, yes, incentives, money is fine and well, but we need more respect, we need more time. As case managers, we get 0 time to do our jobs. We have the same amount of planning as everybody else, and I would ask that we get an extra planning period to case manage so that we can really focus on advocacy. We can really work with our parents and network more. When we're only given the same amount of planning as our general ed counterparts, we're spending most of our time doing lesson planning, going to the meetings that every general ed person has to go to, and we have very little time to coordinate as special educators. to really refine our practices as special educators and to case manage, which is really where our passion lies. We don't have the extra time to do that. So I would say that to keep your folks, to retain special educators, we need the time to be special educators.
Thank you, Heather, so much. Really appreciate that on the ground perspective. And I want to go ahead and take Kevin's question over to Jill. So, and we may not necessarily not naming all of the indicators, but as we're thinking of a campus level excellence, right? A campus that's doing really well. What's maybe one quantitative or one qualitative indicator, or something that you as an educator, you're like, all right, we're doing it, and it looks like this?
So one thing that AISD does is the TEL survey every year that allows staff to give a really honest opinion of how things are going with leadership on their campus. And you'll notice that middle schools always tend to score a little bit lower. I think that might be just because they're all dealing with that middle school age group. But still, when you compare them to other middle schools, I think that you can really get an impression of the cultural and the leadership that is happening from campus to campus when you look at that survey. And it's not widely published or widely utilized to my knowledge in the district. I do look ours up every year because I'm just that kind of data person. So I think that that is a good, like, go check this. It's very quantitative. It gives you that kind of pulse of the staff. It's hard for me to think about a good indicator for parents and what they're receiving, because what I find is that you're very active PTAs. A lot of them are very happy with their school. Everything's going great. If those are the people that you interview, and then you go to other campuses where most of the PTA board is held by teacher positions, because we have not fully engaged our parent community in the way that it should be engaged yet. And so that's a little bit harder to get a good metric across the district.
Thank you so much, Jill.
Yeah,
thank you. So with the 5-ish minutes that we have left, we have such great questions. I want to go ahead and bring to light the one of these questions, I think, that combines what we are as a priority area for us around inclusion. So Noelita, you asked it, and then Piper, you added a little bit to it around what maybe are those barriers right now to creating a district-wide inclusion model, and or is there a role, so I'm combining those, for those standalone programs like life skills and scores, and how do we integrate those, and what might that look like? So I'm going to ping this question over to Lisa.
Okay, so the first is around barriers to inclusion. I think the principal barrier is the goodwill to do so. I think that a lot of people are scared of disability and they feel disempowered. Our teacher prep programs don't necessarily prepare all educators to serve all learners. So if we're going to say that all special education students are general ed students first, that means that general education teachers need to feel empowered to serve all those students. So I'd say the first primary barrier actually is goodwill and open-mindedness to give it a try. As far as the place of scores and SBS and units, I do think they have a role. But unfortunately, our current situation is that there is no uniformity of curriculum or training. They vary widely from campus to campus. And unfortunately, you need to really give a student the opportunity to be served on their home school and try the continuum of least restrictive environment before you're seeing their disability category and sending them to the unit that corresponds. Because so there is a role for them, but they need to be examined. They need to have some more uniformity, and we need some data on outcomes from those units. But having units for unit sakes that is not producing higher outcomes for students is not meaningful.
Thank you, Lisa.
Of course.
Much appreciated.
Thank you.
So for our final question to blend, I'm gonna send this question over to Deb, because I think she's on both sides of this, right? So John, kind of coming to your question of how can special education services, and you mentioned like link up to translation services, but I'm going to take it up a notch to just maybe not just translation, right? But how do we really merge this idea of English language learners that are served in special education? And maybe what are some of the barriers there, and how could we make the services more effective to deliver that community that straddles both sides?
Thanks to all of you. I really think this goes hand in hand with the answer that was just given by Lisa. I would just reframe it a little bit to add to what she said the will, and I would add the vision. There's neither will nor vision. AISD does not even think about including people with disabilities. They don't, even high-level administrators improperly, in SPED, don't really even understand what the word inclusion means. AISD too often looks like, especially in Title I schools, but really at all schools. An elementary school classroom has kids coming and going all day long. They're getting this pull in, this pull out, this intervention. Meaningful whole classroom instruction is not modeled, mentored, facilitated, or even discussed. You go in, you're given a bunch of things by associate soups and area directors. You run, you fill forms in, you fill in worksheets, you take this new program, you go to this unrelated training. We need a vision. And we need a vision to include all children. And that's children with special needs. That's children with any kind of learning disability. That's children who speak another language at home. We've got to understand that that's where it should start. Classroom instruction that's rich, that's rigorous, that's inclusive, that's student-centered, that engages parents, that involves parents. And that's not happening. So we don't speak to our Spanish-speaking parents about what kinds of services they get. Our website is devoid of information. A lot of that is because if we actually tell you what we're supposed to be doing on the campus, we're not doing that. We lie. We do very few things that we're supposed to be doing where it deals with special populations. So across the board, we don't have well-implemented, proper, appropriate, research-based bilingual programs, nor do we have that for inclusive education for SPED. So I think parents are having to choose between what we know all too often is parents are told you can only get monolingual pull-out supports for SPED. And so parents are told that, and it has to do with this lack of inclusion mindset, right? We're not talking about inclusion. We parents walk into schools and say we want inclusion. The school has never heard of it. They've never done it. Myself, Lisa, others on this call, we have been the first parents at our kids' school who pushed for inclusion. Teachers would say to us, no, they go to this other room. Don't you know they're in SPED? They go to this other room. So we don't have, why is the district not getting this? It's federal law, least restrictive environment, and the district doesn't get it, right? So it's unconscionable, but we've got to believe in inclusion. We've got to believe in it for all students, and we've got to make it happen. And enough with the excuses, and enough with the principal delegation, and they can do whatever they want. We've got to actually do it and stop making bilingual parents give up bilingual services. But part of that is because if we were really doing dual language that was inclusive, of course a kid with Down syndrome who speaks Spanish at home would be in the dual language program. But instead, that room, that dual language room, is really seeking to exit them out of their Spanish also, right? So, and what does that mean for a kid with disabilities? Now I can't talk with my mama. I get to be 12 and I can barely speak Spanish. And you know what? If I have Down syndrome, my mama's got to be there for me. And I'm going to tell you a story of a friend of mine whose daughter has Down syndrome who was molested last year on an AISD campus. And they did not adequately interview her. They did not treat her attempted rape seriously. They didn't properly investigate it. Spanish-speaking parents, immigrant parents, non-white parents, and SPED parents are not given the respect and dignity they deserve, and nor are the teachers who serve them. We shouldn't be fighting an uphill battle. We need you to come in and make this board better. We need you to come in and put all the pressure on the superintendent to make sure that principals are ensuring equity on every campus in AISD, not just the ones where PTA is able to engage and raise up and raise the resources for AISD to do the right thing that it should be doing in the first place. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think we can drop the mic on that with Deb. But really, right, exactly. We're so grateful that you all have showed up, right? And not just physically, but just showed up like with willing hearts, curious minds, bringing your questions, bringing your willingness to learn. Because like Deb said, we absolutely need you, right? And we cannot go back. We cannot do and maintain what has been happening. And so we really have so much gratitude for all of you for joining us today. We hope that this is the beginning of a relationship, of a conversation. If you have questions, please reach out. The whole point of this is that we continue to learn from one another and that we stop doing this as a reactionary way. Like Deb said, I only give it to the people that ask me for it because they know the secret password to get really great services for their kids. We should not have a reactionary system that's inequitable in this way. So thank you for joining us. To stay connected to key issues, make sure that you're following the coalition page. Make sure that, connect with velafamilies.org as well. I agree, VELA should not exist, but we're going to be here until this becomes something that's embedded into district practices. And so thank you all.